Welcome to the Lalulah podcast, real life conversations about modern sexuality and how to live a happy, healthy, turned on life. I'm your host Laura Allen, a holistic health coach and founder of Lalulah, an online platform offering natural erotica toys as well as the educational tools you need to expand your pleasure in and outside the bedroom. Welcome back to another episode of the Lalulah podcast. Today I'm talking with Grace Hazel. Grace is a women's healing, sexuality and vagina expert. She is based in Bali, but she works internationally with one-on-one online coaching as well as creating beautiful online courses and retreats. She's even doing a retreat in Ibiza this coming September, and I will link to that in the show notes for anyone who is curious. This is a really beautiful episode. We talk about Grace's personal experience with Vulvodynia. We dive into hormonal health and some of the holistic healing modalities that we can use when trying to rebalance our hormones. We talk about sexual experience with disassociation and healing from painful sex and much, much more. I personally got so much out of this episode and talking with Grace. She is such a beautiful person inside and out, and I'm really looking forward to you hearing this episode. So enjoy the show. Grace. Hi, and thank you so much for being here. I'm really grateful for your time and your energy and you sharing your wisdom on this podcast with me.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. And in the background, you may be able to hear cockerels because I'm in Bali. So I would like to give you guys a heads up of the background sounds of the jungle that I'm in.
I love it. I love that. It's going to add some diversity and culture to my podcast. So I understand that you've just woken up, so I feel like an appropriate question to ask is, what color are you today and why?
I would say the color I'm closing my eyes to feel it. I would say it's a deep blue with the essence and the shimmer around that of a lighter indigo. Why? I'm riffing here with the why I'm a deep blue, but I have woken up with a deep sense of rawness within my emotional being, and it's almost like I've got the blues, but there's like magic around the blues. So there's like this that luminescent light around the blueness due to the magic that the blues can allow you to transform into a new way of feeling and being.
And it's kind of that sort of deep oceanic sort of eternal blue, and there's this mystery around it all, and
yeah, definitely the bottom of the ocean type of blue.
It's a beautiful color. Yeah, awesome. So I would love to hear about you and your story and how you ended up working in the field of sexuality, your own personal experience with it, and what was the tipping point that got you curious and kind of was the catalyst to you exploring this wild world.
Thank you so much for asking that. And it's funny because I'm asked this question a lot and I tend to go into the same old story, and I feel very called to actually Yeah, explain a different, it's going to be the same story, but bring in some other elements which I feel are quite important to address in this moment. So I was brought up in England in a kind of small town by my mum and dad. My mum and dad met when they were 16, and they've been together ever since. And they are like chalk and cheese. So my mum is a born again Christian, and my dad is a atheist. And when I was young, all I remember is him consistently getting into trouble and being out with the lads and at the pub and getting drunk and always coming back with mischief, and my mum just being consistently at church, and my mum would always pray for me from a young age. She would be giving me healings, and they to this point are the most incredible healings I've ever received in my life. So I was brought up in this very opposites attract type of world, and I would say that that's definitely how my life transpired. So having a lot of movement between the world of loving to go out, loving to party. I used to love going to drum and bass raves. I used to take all of the drugs under the that were available to me, and just have an absolute amazing time just being dedicated to music and community, and essentially going into crazy states of being, you know, when you are at raves, you kind of transcend your normal reality. And so I had the dance of these worlds and this kind of naughtiness to also my mum's spirituality. And I was never deeply called to Christianity, but I always knew from a very young age that there was something much more to life than just what was physical. And so I've danced between those two realms, and essentially in this moment now found the balance between the two of them. However, when I was young, that was really hard. And when I was around, I think it was around 19 years old, I had just got myself into a relationship with a partner. And this was the first partner that I would say it was a proper relationship where the guy actually really respected me and I really respected him, rather than the string of relationships I'd had before, which were pretty abusive. And as I got into this relationship, we started to explore in a really deliciously erotic way. He was the first person who had really had deep confidence in his sexuality and was willing to, really just try everything out. And I was so receptive to that and so excited to that. So we spent some time really exploring. And then what started to happen was that every time we would have sex, I would be overcome afterwards by deep pain in my vulva. And it was a very confusing time, because what I was experiencing was essentially the symptoms of urinary tract infection, so cystitis. And I began seeing doctors on a very regular basis, and they would be giving me antibiotics for urinary tract infections that they couldn't actually find. And I went down this route for many years, going to see hospital specialists, until one day they said, you know what, we can't work out what's going on with you. And that meaning you're going to have to just live like this, aka every time I would have sex, I would get into tremendous amounts of pain. I'm speaking of the pain that meant that I couldn't leave the house, the type of pain that I equate to if someone were to take their pants off and sit on top of a roaring fire, and just experience the flames of the roaring fire burning their vagina. That's the type of pain I'm describing. And so, as you can probably imagine, my relationship to sex was beginning to diminish from a place of like, wow, this is so yummy, I want to explore, to if you touch me, I will punch you in the face. It was like that type of reaction. And essentially this went on for around 8 years. Within that time, my relationship broke down. So the relationship I was in broke down. And of course, when we are beginning our sexual relationships or our deep loving relationships with a level of sexuality and intimacy, if that disappears, it's like this really delicious glue that we have as two beings that like really glue the relationship together and keep it vibrant. It just started to turn into stagnancy and of arguments, and it wouldn't have been hate, but it was just like this element of like we needed sexuality to keep the flow and the juiciness and the love of our relationship fresh and new. And what happened during this time is I began to Google the symptoms of what I was experiencing, and I came across a condition literally on Google called Vulvodynia. And Vulvodynia at that time, it was many years ago, was something that I believe was understood in America, but in the UK, especially in the town that I'd grown up in, the doctors had no idea. So I found out the word Vulvodynia, stomped into the doctor's office and said to my GP, please immediately assign me to a specialist in London for this condition. And so he did. And what then transpired was many years of being treated for vulvodynia. And essentially the way that vulvodynia is treated is that if you are experiencing pain, doctors tend to say, right, well, this is a pain condition, how can we cover that up? So that was the way that my vulva pain, or the vulva pain, was essentially medicated. So I was given pharmaceuticals that would totally numb down my entire system, with hope that it would numb down my vagina. And these meds were so strong that I would sometimes wake up and get out of bed and actually fall to the ground, because it was like I was consistently stoned. I was given crazy old creams, which the doctors would say, or the specialists would say, hey, put this on your vagina, on your vulva, before you have intercourse, and then you won't be able to feel anything. And so I was literally being given medications and creams which were essentially asking my body, my wisdom, to shut down and be quiet. And eventually it was like the last straw for me of this journey of really trusting in the medical system. And I want to say, a side note, I really do trust in Western medicine. I believe it's like it does a wealth of good for so many people. But with pain conditions such as vulvodynia and working with people who have deep stuff that needs to be awakened around their sexuality, it's definitely a place. And so last straw for me was when they offered me a operation, which was to remove essentially the skin of my vaginal opening. And because at the time I was so desperate, I was like, if you could actually remove my vagina and transplant me with a new one, I would take that. So I went down the final route of getting this operation. And afterwards, it got so much worse. So the pain I was experiencing, the pain to touch, the consistent pain I was experiencing just got so much worse. And I guess this was the time that I decided that there was no longer going to be a point that I decided to step into the hospital and keep putting my power into the hands of these doctors who really had no deeper idea of my body than I did. And what I knew for sure was, and this was funny because at the time I was very cut off from spirituality, I knew for sure that this was happening for a reason. And I used to, even when me and my ex-boyfriend were having arguments and he would be like, poor us, why has this happened to us? I'd sit there and be like, this has happened for a reason. And I'd almost see myself, me as a person on stage, talking to hundreds of thousands of women about vulvodynia and healing from sexual trauma. And this was when I was like 19 years old. And when I stopped going to the hospital, I began to really sit into what it would mean to holistically heal myself. I began to go to shamanic ceremonies. I worked with plant medicine. I was getting a lot of therapy that wouldn't be like the classic kind of psychotherapy, but therapy which would be more on a space of being able to hold space for psychotherapy, but also for deep energetic work too. I was training to be a yoga teacher at the time, so there was lots of things beginning to come together which were allowing me to form a deeper understanding with what was going on within my body. And eventually I was still experiencing this this pain during sex, and I wasn't addressing that still. What I was doing was going into new relationships or having sex like I was totally free and enjoying it, but really just not communicating with those lovers or those new relationships that I had vulvodynia, and that sex for me was actually really painful. So I was essentially calling in this strange actress to be my sexual self, when actually my true authentic expression was that I really fucking hated sex and it was painful. And so the reason to kind of bring this to the reason of why I do the work that I do is because eventually I began to understand that the deepest and most profound thing that we can do as a woman when we are experiencing any level of disconnect or disassociation or pain within our being, in our life or within our body, is to remember to come back to our body's wisdom. As soon as I came back to my body's wisdom, specifically my vagina, my yoni, I got an incredible, and I'm going to swear, I realize I've already sworn. This is just a bit of me. I got a massive fuck off from my vagina the first time I connected to her. She was like, how even dare you try and form a relationship with me? You've numbed me down after 8 years. You've been consistently allowing me to be penetrated and be put into all sorts of excruciating situations, and now you're turning up at my doorstep to form a relationship. So I had a lot of work to do, and there was a lot of unpacking of grief, of trauma, of bad decision making, and there was a lot of trust to build with my sexuality so that my body could feel safe to actually open up and to receive me, and then once it trusted that within me, to receive others within me too, to actually be open to receive another human's not only body but their essence, their energy within me too. And once I knew, and once I had essentially unraveled all of this, the pain that I was experiencing melted away. And now the only time that I will experience any level of pain, which is literally like, I am not even going to put a time frame on it, because it's like it doesn't happen really ever. But if it does happen, it's if I'm out of alignment. It's if I'm not communicating something to either a lover or a beloved, or if I'm doing something that's not quite in line with my highest truth. And so now it's my job to essentially bring women back that are so in a place of disassociation to their body, or perhaps it's not even an understanding of being disassociated to their body. Perhaps it's showing up as chronic pain in their yoni. Perhaps they're experiencing PCOS or endometriosis. Perhaps they hate sex. Perhaps they're not able to attract the type of partner they want to attract into their life. There's so many different symptoms of not being connected to our body, but it's my truth and it's my job, and I know it's my job of this earth, this my lifetime on earth, to essentially bring women back to their bodies so they can realize their power and their deep innate ability to just be profoundly vibrant in their sexuality and their intimacy and their connection with themselves, with the earth, and with their lovers and beloveds and their friendships and their families and everything else that comes in between.
Wow, that is such a powerful story, and what a journey, and what a purpose. And I feel a bit speechless. That was beautiful. Thank you for that share. I really wanted to circle back a little bit to that sort of like rock bottom point that you hit. You had enough of the Western medical system. It wasn't getting you the results. You were at your wit's end, and you decided to take your health back into your own hands and figure it out sort of essentially on your own. And that can be really scary. And so you say that you went straight into the sort of more esoteric side of things, and you worked with like shamanism and like emotional clearing and all of that kind of stuff. So I'd love to know, especially for the listeners, like, where did you go to find these courses, mentors, books, and are there any specific tools that you can recommend for people who maybe are experiencing similar symptoms but have no idea what to do or where to go or who to turn to about it, other than you, obviously? But I mean, you know, in the beginning, it can be really scary, and like researching this stuff online and on Google, there's a lot of unregulated information out there, and it's not easy to navigate. So I'd love to know what you did.
Thank you for that question, because it's actually a question that I still contend with to this day. To the point of, if I really want to learn something. So last year, I really wanted to learn about sexuality and shamanism and essentially like priestesshood. And I had no idea where to look for that. It was like going onto Google, and there's just like, there's so much, but there's also so little. And there's always those trainings that are there, but don't quite resonate on a deep level. And so what I would say that I did back then was explore. At the time, I was doing a lot of yoga. As I mentioned, I was training to be a yoga teacher in my early 20s. And through yoga, there was a lot of talk about other spiritual practices. And at the time, when people would speak into plant medicine or shamans, I would be so frightened. I was brought up in a Christian household, right? And I was taught that anything other than God or Jesus was evil and bad and demonic. So to talk of spirit or helpers or whatever was in those conversations, like, totally frightened me. Yet it frightened me because there was some truth in it. There was something there that I knew was triggering for me, because I knew that it was real and that it was something that I should feel into more. And so I listened to those pieces, those little messages that I would receive from having conversations with others. My belief is that when you can get a grounded recommendation from somebody, that you know and that you trust, or perhaps like it's even a podcast you listen to like this and you hear someone recommend something to you. That's like, for me, a really grounded place to come from exploring these things. So when I first started exploring plant medicine, that was through people I already knew. When I would go and see new healers, let's say, that would be coming through a recommendation of somebody who'd been like, this person is really legitimately epic and will change your life. So forming a sense of really understanding, I would say, like, where is it that you want to go? So for me, I knew that I didn't want to go to the hospital anymore. I knew that I'd had this word holistic healing floating around my head for some time. And so I was then open to explore all levels of holistic healing, to understand what that was and to also see what worked for me. So it took me a really long time because I wasn't that specific. I said holistic healing, so I have essentially done every single bit of holistic healing under the sun. And so I would recommend for anybody who's really wanting to heal in from whichever space that they're in, whether that be vulvodynia or whether that be the fact that they don't want to have sex with their boyfriend, you know, if they can sit and be like, what is it that I want to overcome here? And what would assist me in overcoming that? Would it be a mentor? And if that were to be a mentor, what would that mentor look like? What would they feel like? Would that mentor be a male, or would that be a female mentor? Would they have experienced something that I've experienced? Or, you know, just really defining what you're calling in. And I'm as I'm saying this, I'm essentially telling people to manifest what they want as a mentor, or what they want to begin to explore, and then that will tend to show up in their life. Of course, that's like putting yourself out there and asking for recommendations, asking and trying out working with practitioners. But when you can be really clear on what you're looking for, you'll tend to find that exact course, that exact mentor, that exact book that's going to really change and propel you into the deeper understanding of where you need to be with what you're experiencing in this moment.
Yes, great advice. You mentioned something in there that reminded me of my sort of epiphany, I guess you could call it, when I decided to take my health into my own hands. And I was sitting by the pool and I just sort of wrote down this oath to myself that I would stop at nothing, and I mean nothing, because my health journey started with my mental health. I've struggled with depression and anxiety my whole life, and it was something that no matter how much therapy I did, I never seemed to be able to break free from it. And I knew that there was more waiting for me if I could just let it all go somehow. And so yes, I just remember hearing this word self-love and, you know, all of that holistic health stuff. And I was like, you know what? I will stop at nothing. And I wrote pages in my diary about saying that I am on this dedicated path now. And I even text messaged my friend saying, I don't care if I have to become the Pope. I am going to figure out what this self-love stuff is all about, because right now I've got no fucking idea, and that is about to change. So, and that's where the journey began. And it started with the decision, right? And the awareness, and just going, okay, I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to invest the time and the energy, and I'm going to really put it out there that this is what I'm looking for now. And then, of course, the answers will start to come to you. And yeah, it is nice, I feel, especially in the beginning, to make sure that you are getting the appropriate recommendations and seeking out people who you deeply resonate with and trust. And you'll know, because your whole body will feel safe, you know, and not just your head, not just your heart, but your gut and your sex center. You'll feel safe about it. And I feel like that's very important. We can speak more into that a bit later. And of course, they can reach out to yourself or I if they're looking for any specific recommendations. I'm sure you'd be happy to point people in the right direction, and I feel the same way. So, yes. Oh gosh, hormonal health is just such a big topic at the moment. And yeah, especially as we are now, science is really starting to come up with some incredible research, and we're starting to understand women's bodies a lot more, hormone health, the reproductive system, and how it is all integrated. And our sex organs are an important part of that. So, yeah, I guess like using kind of self-pleasure and sexuality and getting in touch with our femininity and sort of like coming home to ourselves and our bodies as, a healing tool, and just as important as, going to your Western medicine doctor as well, and sort of learning how to balance your endocrine system and so on, because like you said before, it's all holistic. So yeah, maybe we can speak to that a little bit. Just hormone health, femininity, and using our sexuality as a tool for healing.
Totally. And it's so beautiful that you mention this femininity piece, because I had a revelation yesterday around femininity, and I wouldn't say it's so much of a revelation, but something that I just feel true and into at the moment, which is because I'm in Ubud, and the essence of Ubud is very, very feminine. So there's every other person you speak to is a priestess or a divine feminine women's empowerment coach. So it's everywhere. And when I first arrived here, I arrived from London, and London has a very kind of masculine quality to it. It's very everybody's working in a very highly goal-oriented career, and it's all go and get to the office and achieve. And I got to Ubud, and there's women that are dancers, and they're in these beautiful clothes, and they're adorned with like divine jewelry, and I suddenly started feeling like, am I a fraud? Am I a fraud for not being a really amazing dancer, or being consistently, flowy and soft? Because sometimes I can be a bit of a lad. I can be like, I crack crass jokes, and I'm a bit silly, and I felt so kind of clunky and clumsy in front of these really soft, fluid women. And so the reason I'm saying is just because I believe for some of the women that I work with, and also even for myself, I can sometimes come into this understanding that femininity is about like having flowers in our hair, and giggling and skipping through fields, and winding our hips like a belly dancer. And my revelation yesterday was that I was in this dance class, and I've always been really bad at actually coordinating myself into a dance routine. And I was in this dance class, and this was happening fully. I was like noticing how my hands were flinging in the different direction to my hips, and I was just feeling so clumsy and looking around being like, I'm so not in my feminine right now. And actually, as soon as I said that, and I was like, I don't have to be the most fluid, graceful human being to a synchronized dance routine to be a woman. For me, embracing my femininity and my womanness is actually being like, wow, you're so clumsy sometimes, but you really love to dance, and you're here dancing and moving and enjoying yourself. And that for me is feminine. I'm embodying myself. And it's like I'm actually accepting that my body may not be the same way as everyone else's, but it's my body. And that for me is dropping into my feminine, dropping into that loving up of what it is to be in my womanness and my body.
Mm, such a great story. And it's also being really present, I'm hearing you say, and letting go of that judgment of yourself and having compassion and just being in the moment in your body and letting it be and not trying or forcing or pushing it to be something that it's not.
Totally, totally. And I'm aware that you asked me a question about hormones, and I just went into that feminine rant because it was so present for me. So I'm more than happy to go into the just to speak into hormonal health and hormonal imbalance. Um, what I notice with my clients is that I tend to see a lot of women who are experiencing, we've mentioned it, but things where the hormones are out of balance. So PCOS, endometriosis, perhaps having an inability, or they're not able to conceive. And my realization through working with many, many women who are experiencing such things is that if we really get to the core of what's going on, there is essentially a playing out of a imbalance between their masculine and their feminine energies. So perhaps they are really, really heavily into an unhealthy masculine way of being. So that type of London way of being that I've mentioned, which is getting up, looking at your phone, really being like essentially switching on your system into work mode, getting to work and being in a high level of stress, actively doing, actively being, setting goals, meeting goals, setting more goals. It's consistently doing, and being very much up in the mind. And what then happens is that the balance between our masculine and feminine is completely out of whack. So our masculine is in charge and our feminine kind of gets suppressed. And this is happening on a very energetic level. However, if this happens over a longer period of time, the energetics of our system begin to move into more of a physical reality, which would be our hormones. So we experience a hormone imbalance. And then if we're still acting out in this imbalance and still going at it in our everyday world of being like really up in the mind and not giving ourselves time to really soften and be in our feminine, we'll then start to notice this imbalance will become present in our physical body. So whether that be really, really bad period pains, verging on endometriosis period pains, or perhaps your libido has just gone to zilch and you have no want or desire to be sexual at all. For me, this is when we can just start to peel back the layers to the essence of the imbalance between the masculine and the feminine energies. And what I would love to just add to that is undercurrent of the way that we live. We live in a society which is very, like, it's a masculine oriented society, which is the patriarchy, right? And that impacts women and men just as much as it impacts women. So it's not good for either of us. It's good in certain ways, but it's not good for this stuff around hormonal health. So there's the essence of that's the way that we should be as human beings, as women. However, again, a lot of the time with what I see with my clients is that for those women who really don't feel safe to be in their feminine, if we can go right back into childhood or even into their ancestral matriarchal lineage, there's sometimes some form of trauma which creates a level of mistrust or fear to show up in our feminine. And so there's so much at play here. But if we can truly come back to a place of trusting and feeling safe to be embodied in our womanness, in our femininity, we will begin, in my belief, to see grand changes in the way that our body is showing up, but also our internal reality is showing up too.
There's something about reconnecting with our own unique feminine essence. And just to circle back to what you were saying before about your realization on the dance floor of how femininity doesn't need to look like a Bali goddess to you. It looks like maybe a little bit of a clumsy Grace Hazel, and that is your feminine essence. And so it's nice to just reiterate that and say that, femininity and connecting to your feminine essence is completely unique to you, and it doesn't have to look like anything. It just needs to feel right within your body. And once we really start to explore discovering our own femininity and really stepping into that, that's when you start to show up as that woman who walks into the room and holds that presence, who can hold a boundary, and who can be very persuasive in the way that she presents herself, and is just really in integrity with who she is. And that's not saved for these special people. That's something that we all have within ourselves, and it's just a matter of doing the exploration, doing the work, and reconnecting and finding it again, because it's just completely shut down, and it's not conducive to the 9-to-5 London city lifestyle or anything like that, is it? So it takes a bit of time.
And it totally can be introduced into any type and style of lifestyle. For me, when working with clients, it's exactly what we have been mentioning about really tapping into what it means to be in their feminine. So of course I can teach and guide what the feminine essence is, like what it is to evoke the feminine essence. However, the work that I do is really getting a woman to step into what their truth of that is. So there's no point me going and saying to a woman, hey, go to dance classes every day to get into your feminine. If they hate to dance, that's going to make them feel crap. If they can really find what it is to be truly in their or authentic expression of them, then that's going to really, as you mentioned, create a way of being from the inside, that when they walk into a room, they're embodied and empowered because they're being true to what that is for them.
Yes, definitely. I'd love to circle back again. I've just that in your story, I kind of, all of these little light bulbs went off in my head, and I'm like, oh, I want to talk about that. Oh, I want to talk about that. I'm sure we could talk for the entire day about all of this stuff, but I feel like one thing that I really wanted to dive into more was this disassociation during sex due to pain or numbness in the vagina, and how it's very common for women who experience these symptoms, or perhaps they haven't even had an orgasm and therefore they don't really receive much pleasure from sex, and so they almost treat it as I'm just doing this because it's what I should do, and disassociating, having a very disconnected, disassociative experience, which can be, many things. It can lead to soft trauma, and it can also just feel really gross in our body and be emotionally painful. So, I mean, there's a lot that we can talk about around that. I feel like a great place to start would be to talk about taking, again, control back into our own hands, and taking the responsibility of our pleasure back into our own hands, and learning how to navigate our own bodies and what brings us pleasure, so that we can then communicate it and put the healthy boundaries in place that we need to, so that we can start enjoying sex again. So take it away, Grace.
Yeah, what comes to mind to speak about around that piece around owning pleasure? First of all, I'd like to talk into this disassociation piece because again, it's something that I see prevalent in the messages I get, the women that I work with, and so it feels like a very strong piece, not to just straight bang into self-pleasure, but to actually address the fact that we disassociate. So there's many reasons why we disassociate during sex, and that's really to find out through session work of why we do it and how we can transform from that. However, to just be quite generic, there is a thing around the way that we are taught around sex that we should be as women. So a lot of our understanding of what a woman is during a sexual experience is based on the porn industry. And so there's a lot of performance in the porn industry. Like essentially porn is a performance, right? You've got people coming onto set to perform a really erotic act of sex. There's not going to be any level of grossness, or well, I mean there is grossness, but like that rawness, that primalness, and the funny noises and the sweat and all of the stuff that's like not really shown, that is actually part of our true nature. So the sounds in porn are very like made up and high pitched, whereas the sounds when I've got more in touch with like my true feminine, I'm back on the feminine again, my true sexual my true sexual noises, they're very like deep sounds, like they're coming from the base of me, and sometimes they're like really not very pretty. And so yeah, we're taught as women that perhaps we should look a certain way, we should be doing certain things, and it becomes a little bit like we need to perform or we need to act in order to A, please our partner, and B, show up as the way that a sexual woman should. And there's lots of other levels to that disassociation, which can be to do with trauma and putting in another level of essentially bringing in another, I say you're channeling, I call it channeling the sexual goddess, which is like, that sounds really fun, but actually it's not you. If you're disassociating and allowing some sexual goddess to come through and you're just looking from above at what the whole scene playing out, that's not you embodied during sex. So that's the disassociation piece that happens with a lot of us. And then what can happen is, because we're so disassociated and we're so in this performance piece of like really being like, hey, how can I pleasure you, or how can I show up as a highly sexual being, we tend to not then communicate what really is true, because we don't know what's true. Perhaps we have an understanding of how we could have an orgasm, but it feels a bit scary to say that in a sexual interaction. So the core or the foundational thing that I like to introduce to women who are experiencing a level of inability to communicate during their sexual experiences, perhaps they're feeling pain, or maybe it's as simple as they're having sex, but there's something like, I feel like there's so much more to sex than this, which was me for literally my whole entire life. I was like, people seem to really like this sex thing, and I think it's all right, but there must be more. And for anyone listening, there is more. And it really does come from essentially like dedicating yourself to the practice of getting to know what your desires are, how you like to be touched, like what pleasure is for you, what intimacy is for you, what connection is for you, which is different to every single person, which is why we can't read sex tips from a magazine and suddenly be cured. It's like we have to find this out for ourselves. So self-pleasure is key, right? Self-pleasure, like, yeah. And when I say self-pleasure, I mean masturbation, for anyone who's listening and haven't got on the old self-pleasure train or terminology yet. But self-pleasure for me is like the thing that I come back to time and time again. Even in this moment of my reality now, I've just come out of the most gorgeous relationship with a partner where we had the most to this point in my life, the most deep and profound sexual connection and sexual experiences. And so, of course, I'm in a place where I'm like, oh, I'm missing him and I'm missing that connection. So I know to come back to self-pleasure. It doesn't mean that I need to go out suddenly and find a new man who can give me that level of depth in sexual connection. It's like, if I can come back to myself and fill myself up with self-pleasure, that's a healer for me. So for those who are, having pain, or perhaps not being able to own and understand the depths of what pleasure is for them, coming to the foundations of changing up your self-pleasure routine into a time that is not just about coming directly into orgasm through touching your clitoris or wherever it is that you love to be stimulated to come to climax, but to actually loving up the entirety of your body. So from head to toe, getting to know one's pleasure and resensitizing every single cell of our being to understand that pleasure, yes, can come from our clitoris, and yes, stimulation of our breasts, and perhaps there's places in your yoni when she's blossomed and opened that are also really delicious to touch. However, what happened if we decided to commit ourselves to that type of touch and pleasure throughout our being? That begins to radiate our levels of how we experience pleasure, because I believe, for real, if we could spend as much time concentrating on our so-called erogenous zones and started to be like, wow, it feels really good to softly stroke my cheek, or to massage my jaw, or to gently scratch my forearm or my chest, or whatever it be, to really just refine our sensitivity, we can then begin to rediscover pleasure is not just like orgasmic throughout our entire body and being without even touching our yoni.
Absolutely. It's summer here at the moment, and I'm personally receiving so much pleasure from simply feeling that warmth from the sun on my naked breasts, or even when I'm doing the dishes and I can feel every single little bubble popping on my skin. You know, that is just delicious. Like, that is pleasure too. And it's beautiful. I love how you said that. And I think it's great to have awareness. It's like, how do you turn yourself on, and how do you receive pleasure? And it doesn't necessarily have to be sex related at all. And also, I do just want to thank you for mentioning and really taking, giving that whole disassociation piece space, because disassociation and numbness in the vagina and pain during sex, not being able to reach orgasm, these are real issues that a lot of women face, and they're deeply personal and they are completely unique. And I want to invite people who might be experiencing symptoms like that to, you know, seek the help that they need. There are so many qualified, beautiful professionals out there who can really, really help you get to the bottom of these things. Even psychologists, you know. So it's about showing up for yourself and doing the work, because there can be a lot of, emotional blockages and we could open a can of worms here. We're not going to go into it, but there could be so many things. And it's, I just want to invite everyone to remain open to that and allow themselves the space and the time that they need to go through that part of the process as well, before just, jumping into crystal dildos and, ecstatic dance.
I'm in full agreement, and actually this for me is the most important piece. And I truly believe that, well, for myself in my own practice with the people I work with, I will never ever ever try and slather a load of femininity tips on top of what is like a deep wealth of stuff that needs to be cleared first. So if there is trauma there, if there is places of disassociation or whatever's going on, I believe addressing those things and really like bringing light to the stuff that we suppress and put in shadow, and the stuff that's difficult, that is the most important work that we can do. And it's like, I see this so much in the spiritual community that we can just be like love and light, love and light. And I see this happening also in this like feminine embody work, that it's like feminine embodiment. But if we're like, if undercurrent of that is stuff that we have not resolved yet, it doesn't work. We can slaver a load of femininity embodiment things on top of our of a foundation that's like doesn't trust or has fear or trauma, or I'm just going to give some examples, like is in fear of men, or has been traumatized in the past by men or with women, or there's so many stories that we can tap into. But if those things aren't addressed and cleared and loved up to their core, they're going to continue living with us for the rest of our life. So for me, it's my work to go there and to really drop into those spaces and be real about it, so that then we can actually, again, it's that authenticness of showing up as ourselves, to like embodying all of the stuff that is us, not just the light fancy stuff that looks feminine and pretty and sexy and sexual, but like all of the stuff that isn't, you know. I wrote this long list of all of the stuff that I don't like about myself on a big heart the other day, and my friend was like, oh, why did you do that? And I was like, it wasn't to make myself feel bad, it was because I wanted to write down everything that I have internally that I say badly about myself, and to put it in a heart, and to look at that every morning and love myself up for all of the things that perhaps I don't like, because that's really when we do the work, to just be like, that is a part of who I am, just as all of these things that are good about me are who I am. And I'm not going to surpass these things because they're just as important of me as a being, you know?
Absolutely. And that's such an integral piece of self-love and what it is to truly love yourself, because we all have shadow, we all have these things that we're working on, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're either bad or good. It's just part of us. And yeah, I love what you say about really truly allowing ourselves to take the space that we need to do that deeper healing, that epic, that shadow work. I personally had, just over a year of celibacy. I didn't kiss, go on dates, nothing. I barely self-pleasured at all in the beginning, to be honest. It was only towards the end that I really started to rediscover my own body. But I genuinely just needed that time out to do the work that I was about to embark on, that I'm still embarking on. So yeah, I think it's nice to let people know that it's okay to take some time out for yourself and to do what you need to do, and being sexually embodied and feminine and divine and the erotic goddess or whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are, having orgies and multiple orgasms. So, yeah.
Exactly. And I remember having this revelation after having a big sexual awakening and really wanting to be in like play parties and exploring my sexuality every single day. And there was a period of my life where I was able to do that. However, there was this point for me where I think I was listening to a podcast, and it was like, the sexually liberated woman isn't the woman that is consistently sexually charged and sexually turned on, but she's actually able to really just flow with the nature, which is fluidity of her sexuality. So sometimes we will feel more sexually charged, and sometimes we may go through periods where we really don't want to connect in a sexual way, and all of that's okay. And all of that's perfect and just where you're at right now. And the more that we can begin to stop fighting against the fluidity of our sexual nature and the way that sometimes we are highly charged sexually and sometimes we don't feel that at all. If we can stop pushing against the times when we don't feel that at all, we can allow that to move and change into what it's meant to be, and to receive the understandings and the learnings of those periods, like you mentioned, of celibacy, and of not feeling that turn on, because those experiences can be just as awakening as the ones where we aren't sexually active and like consistently cultivating our eros, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, and it even happens monthly with our cycle, or just, purely for no reason at all. I'm currently in a relationship, and right now I just want myself for myself. I don't want to share myself with my partner right now. I just want to be with me, and that's okay. And I know and I trust that, like our erotic relationship is vital and alive, and it's okay for me to take this time out and I can give it to myself with love and not judge myself or feel like I'm, not showing up as this like sex goddess. So yeah, that's actually been something that's been really valuable for me to discover over this last week. So yay for us. Okay, Grace, we're going to dive into some quick cues now. We're going to wrap up this podcast. And the first one that I've got for you is, how do you cultivate more pleasure in your life?
Ooh, I cultivate more pleasure and it's funny you ask this because it's gone straight to my mind, and I always go to the first thing that comes to my mind because that feels the most true. Meditation. I feel like whenever I meditate and connect in to the earth and then connect up and open myself up to being, I receive so much pleasure. Like my body begins to move and ripple something through it that is beyond pleasure that I've experienced by actually like really touching my body. So meditation for sure, I get the most pleasure from.
I love that. I'm literally doing like fist pumps right now because I'm with you 100%. Meditation is like my number one favorite like pleasure tool. Amazing. Okay. And what's one thing you've learned about self-love recently?
Okay, self-love. So my understanding of self-love has definitely been redefined over the years. Self-love for me is actually being in integrity to I'm going to be more specific actually. So self-love for me is actually just being responsible for myself. It doesn't mean putting some form of like clay mask on my face and having a bath. For me, self-love means that if I'm working towards something, so for instance, financially, if I want to create a different type of life for myself, self-love would be like taking responsibility for my finances, ensuring that I know where I'm at, and like really epically holding space for myself to grow and to transform. So self-love for me would be self-responsibility on the levels of places that sometimes don't feel that comfortable to address, but addressing them anyway, because self-loving and loving the places that are uncomfortable allows for those places to come out of shadow and to be loved up and then grown.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Being in integrity and being responsible and standing in our truth. Hey, awesome. What is your number one self-care ritual that you're practicing at the moment? Oh, sorry. What is your number one sensual self-care ritual that you're practicing at the moment?
So sensual self-care, my sensual self-care ritual would be, I might pronounce this really wrong, but it's bentonite clay. I believe that's how you say it. And I mix that up with a couple of drops of tea tree oil and some water. And I rub the clay all over my body. and I tend to do this in the evening in a ritual setting. I get a journal, and I just journal all the places where I'm at and what I'm feeling, and essentially allow myself to tune into things that I wish to let go of and what I wish to call in. Bentonite clay, it essentially sucks toxins out of your system. So sometimes I've used this clay and I get like spots on my skin because it's really sucking anything that's just toxic in my skin out. But I also feel it happens on an energetic level too. So sensual ritual would be like covering myself with that clay, really journaling, and then showering everything off, cleansing everything away.
That's a great idea. I feel you've inspired me. That's something that I'm going to want to do very soon, I feel.
Thank you for rituals, essentially.
Epic. Okay, so our final question is, if you had to choose one book, what has been the most impactful book in your life? What book has sort of inspired you the most and been the most impactful?
The most impactful book for me was when I discovered Pussy, which was at the very, very beginning of the journey of my, I would call this like sexual awakening. So Pussy was my favorite because it was the first time that I had read a book which was written by a woman who's so groundedly and hilariously and authentically story told her way through her embodiment and embracing of her own pussy and sexuality, whilst also giving really like great hints and tips and tricks throughout the way. So it's like a workbook alongside storytelling, all about obviously pussy. So that was my deep pivotal book for me.
That is such a great book, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes for anyone who wants to get their hands on it. So, oh my gosh, Grace. Okay, thank you so much. This has been epic. I feel, we've just covered so many juicy topics in here, and I've personally gotten so much out of it, and I'm sure the listeners will too. So thanks again for your time and just for being your beautiful self in the world and your purpose and your mission. It's so clear and it's so beautiful, and it's coming from such a heart-centered space, and I just, I love it.
It's been an absolute pleasure to join you on your podcast, and the questions and the topics we've covered feel just super juicy and real. And if anyone wishes to just follow the work that I do, I'm on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Grace with 3 underscores Hazel, and you can get all of that information of all of the stuff that I offer and do from there.
Absolutely. I'll be linking to you and to your website, and just making a big sort of arrow pointing to your work underneath in the show notes. So yes.
Thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor to get to speak to you and to all of your people.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this episode, hit like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to share it with someone who you think could benefit from hearing it too. You can also sign up for Lalulah news and stay up to date with all the juicy content that we only share on email. And I want to take a moment to honor you for following your curiosity and prioritizing your pleasure in this way. And until next time, thank you so much for listening. And I'll be back with another episode soon.